Thank you. Let's just see if we can get this up. Okay, yeah, so sorry about that. There we go. All right, so yes, I'm Mike. I've just spent the last sort of 8 months traveling around Europe and hiking places, and these are some of the photos I've taken. I've put those on my title slides. It's nothing to do with my talk. It's purely self-indulgent. They wouldn't let me do a talk about travel, so enjoy those. The title of my talk is Advanced Fluid Typography and More. And hang on a sec, I haven't got my slides up. Look at my notes. Be cool. And I put the little and more there because a lot of the techniques that I'm talking about, they relate to more than just typography, and more importantly, the broader concepts that I'm talking about can be used anywhere in web design as a way of thinking. And I want you to pay special attention to that theme and that way of thinking because it's something that I want to discuss with you. And that is that theme. I'm not going to make it difficult for you. I'm going to be talking about an alternative approach to responsive design. And I'm going to ask you to maybe think about putting media queries and breakpoints largely aside and thinking about other techniques, things like viewport units, calc expressions, and what they can do as a way of implementing some responsive design patterns. Now, although we all like to think that we live in this wonderful post-pixel utopia, the truth is we all very much think in pixels. In fact, it's a widely known secret that all the unit types we regularly use are just an abstraction of a base font size, and we usually know this to be 16 pixels. So we've never really given up complete control. It's not a difficult calculation to work out what the pixel size of something on the screen is going to be, and the chances are you do this, whether you do it knowingly or just intuitively have an idea of what the pixel size on the screen is, the chances are you are doing that. But of course, who doesn't love correcting someone on the internet? And this is literally the internet live at the moment. We're streaming this, right? So if you have a look around in the people next to you, if you see someone with a smug smile on their face, the chances are that they're thinking, well, actually, Mike, a percentage width is relative to the parent element, not the base font size. And okay, fair enough, very, very clever, Melbourne, you got me. But the truth is, when this happens, we try to control it with media queries, containers, grids, layout systems, and more to make sure that our responsive components play safe within our pixel boundaries. And of course, this panda is a metaphor for a responsive component, trying to break free of the systems and limitations we've put around him. And is that a stretch of a metaphor? It absolutely is, but I think that you'll agree it was worth it to get this guy on a slide. So the point that I'm not getting at is that whilst percentages might change, 20% is always 20%, right? Whether it's on a smartphone, I'm over here. Whether it's on a smartphone or a desktop, 20% is always 20%. So we've come to accept that this is how it is on the web. And I think that when we get to this way of thinking, we can become close to new ways of thinking and fail to see better options. We just accept that that's how it is. And so those limitations may have shaped our thinking. I don't know if you've seen this before, but if you draw a circle on the ground, a cat has the tendency to want to come and sit inside it. And I think that as web designers and developers, we do this as well. We draw our own circles and we sit in them. And it's not that uncommon. In the early days of like computer animation, video games and film and things, a lot of what they did was borrowing from the mediums that came before them. So I've been told that like early television was a lot of people describing the set that they were standing on, because that's what they would have done on the radio. And you can do this on a broad level, or you can do this with specific technologies. And I think that we do tend to do some of this on the web as well. But what if these are perceived limitations? What if we could have something that, say, starts off at 20% on a small screen and fluidly transitions to 50% on a large screen like this? Well, the fact is we can do this. This example was recorded in a browser, and it's not 150 breakpoints. It's a real fluid transition. It's achieved with calc and viewport units. And I'm going to show you how you can do some things like this, as well as other techniques for achieving min and max font sizes, fluid modular scale headings, and a few other tricks. But first, let's take a look at existing responsive typography. And I think it's fair to say that existing responsive typography techniques are not ideal. Now, the problem that I have with examples like this is that they're clunky, they require multiple media queries, and they don't necessarily scale in relation to anything else on the page. So like our Panda, they can trigger overflow, jump out of containers, and things like that. Why we've persisted with these methods for as long as we have, I'm not sure. Not when there's better options. So viewport units scale fluidly, but as you can see, they're not without their own limitations. They're really well supported as well. In fact, IE9 was an early mover on this, so you can get them all the way back to IE9. They're quite easy to understand as well. But yes, there are some limitations. When you get down to small screen sizes, you can barely read that, right? But again, these are perceived limitations. So we can get a minimum font size with calc, right? We just say 18 pixels plus 3 viewport widths. This means that at a viewport width of 0, the font size is going to be exactly 18 pixels, and from there it will scale at the same rate as 3 viewport widths. Now, more often than not, we might want a font size that stops scaling at a viewport width other than 0. And of course, we can do this with media queries. So here I've set a font size of 18 pixels, and then above 600 pixel media query, I've set the font size to 3 viewport widths. And if we do the calculations right, we can work out the exact point where 3 viewport widths equals 18 pixels, so that there's no jump between a fixed and a fluid value. And it works like this. It's the font size divided by the number of viewport units divided by 100. So 18 divided by 3 divided by 100 gives you 600. And that's where our media query was. And if you've been paying attention, you will have worked out that, hey, I can do that for maximum font size as well. So here's another example. 3 viewport widths, fluid, and then above a certain size, we've chosen 24 as a maximum. So we do 24 divided by 3 divided by 100, and that gives us our 800 pixels there. So when I'm doing this, I like to look at a reference like this to get an idea of how the different viewport units scale across different screen sizes. And those of you that have been listening intently will be going, well, there's still limitations, right? Essentially, we're confined to one column of this table. If I wanted a font size that started off at, say, 10 pixels at a 500 pixel viewport width, and then scaled to 24 pixels at an 800 pixel viewport width, I couldn't do that, not without a breakpoint. And as well as that, we were calculating where those media queries should be, right? Not choosing them. So every medium has these limitations, and sometimes it's hard to know when things are perceived limitations. It turns out that this one too is a perceived limitation. With viewport units in calc, you can have typography that scales between specific pixel values over a specific viewport range. It looks something like this. And I know that looks a little scary, but quite simply it's a function where viewport units are the variable. This takes a value within a range and applies that value to a new range. So if I had a range of 1 to 100 and a value of 50, and then I applied this to a new range between 1 and 200, my new value would be 100. Both of those are right in the middle of those respective ranges. The thing here is I'm doing it with viewport widths and font sizes. Now, functions can be simplified. That doesn't look so scary. And this is what it looks like. So as you can see, as you go down, the font scales. It gets to a minimum size and it stops scaling, and the same on the way up. So there's the font stops scaling. Now that's pretty handy, right? But what else can we do with that? So sometimes you might want to selectively turn this on and off. And what I typically do is I apply that calculation to the root EM, the HTML element or the root element, and then I just use REMs throughout my design. I don't want lots of those calculations all through my style sheets because maintainability is important too. So if I'm doing that and I want to turn it off, I can put a fixed font size on a container and then use EMs inside that container. I can, of course, do the reverse too. So this is what that looks like. So as you can see, I've got this little block off to the side here. It might be like a caption or some kind of aside to an article piece. It's not the best design thing. I'm sure you can do better than that. But I hope that that shows an example of what I'm getting at. And I don't think we see much of this kind of thing because if you're using breakpoints, it's not that easy to do that type of thing. So are a few of you feeling like this? Mike, this is confusing. I want to use fluid typography, but I don't want to have to remember stuff. And that's fair enough, right? So let's just forget all of that and use SASS, right? So cheating with SASS, and of course it's not cheating, this is how I do it as well. You can create a mix-in that will generate that equation for you as well as the media queries that you might need. And you just set a minimum font size, a maximum font size, a minimum screen size and a maximum screen size, and you punch them into some kind of mix-in. I haven't shown the mix-in code there because it doesn't really matter. There's lots of them out there. If you Google for them, you'll find like less, SASS, stylus, post CSS, whatever you want. If you can't find any of them, feel free to hit me up on Twitter or find my blog. It's made by Mike. There's examples up there. So what else can we do with this? Fluid modular scales. How many people know what a modular scale is? Oh, about half, I would say. So I think it's best described visually. Each of the headings here is 1.2 times the size of the previous heading. That means that as they get larger, their variation in size also gets larger. And typically when I'm designing or setting typography, I like to find a scale that works well for mobile devices and a scale that works well for desktop. On desktop, I think it looks better to have more variation. And on mobile, I like to have a more uniform scale. So how do I do that? Well, calculating a modular scale is really easy, but this is a 15-minute talk and we don't have time for that. So go to typescale.com, choose a size for small screen, and choose a size for large screens. Copy all of those values, and you can easily change those values to REMs, pixels, or whatever you want to do. And then copy them into the mix-in like this, where the value from one scale is your minimum value for one heading, and the maximum value is the other value that goes into the mix-in there, and you do that for each heading level or each element that you want on your modular scale. And the result looks something like this. So as you can see, it transitions to a more uniform scale, and then as you go up, it's more varied. And I don't know about you, but headings have always been the thing that I've had the most trouble with when setting typography. And this particular technique just solved so many things for me. I'm not saying it'll solve all problems, but it's really nice to just put in and see it sort of work and be right on every screen size. But of course, it's not just typography that you can do this with, right? So who hasn't struggled for the perfect implementation of a responsive banana? So this isn't just font sizes again. This is scaling the width and height attributes of an SVG. They're both length values, right? So I just wanted to show that you can do that. Here's another example where I've implemented a fluid vertical rhythm. So you don't have to throw out everything you know about design, baseline grids, vertical rhythm, those things will work. I've written a little bit about this. Some other people have written about this as well. If you search for that, you'll find those implementations. You just need to think a little bit differently to maybe what you're used to, and maybe give up a smidgen of that control over pixels. This is another example. Again, it's not the best design, but there's a lot going on here that's interesting. The images are transitioning between a 1:1 ratio and a 16:9 ratio, so square and rectangle. The spacing around the boxes is changing relative to the available space in the viewport, as well as inside those boxes, so sort of they're spreading apart as well as sort of spacing themselves out. And the result is like a tight Instagram-y type layout on mobile, and a more airy, scrapbooky type thing on desktop. And again, it's not perhaps the best design, but I can't think of any other way you could do this currently with the sort of layout techniques that we have. So I find that interesting, and I'm wondering what other people can do with it as well. So we've looked at some things that we can do today with this, but what about the future of fluid typography? Has anyone seen this before? No. So this is an example by Eric van Blocklen of a new font format, variable fonts. And what this will allow is for font designers to specify limits of how bold, how italic, as well as other custom axes that we might not have even thought of. So as designers, developers, we'll be able to choose any value without downloading multiple font files as you would have to at the moment. So as well as saving multiple font files from having to be downloaded, we could be able to interpolate these values, right? There's an excellent article on A List Apart by Andrew Johnson that talks about live font interpolation on the web. And in this, he touches on the problem that I've been describing today of he calls it bending points in design rather than breakpoints. And I think that either side of a breakpoint, typically, the design is sort of already burdened by the thing that was putting pressure on it, saying that we needed to have a breakpoint there. So often I find that it's not ideal either side of the breakpoint. It's kind of a compromise point, really, isn't it? And I also think that it's important to remember that media queries have been around longer than responsive design. They're kind of a response both to a user need as well as a response to the technology that was available. If we were to do this today and look at responsive design, free of those past perceptions and perceived limitations, what would we develop as the right tool for implementing responsive websites? And that's why I'm proposing that we need a native interpolation function in CSS. Now, if you've used interpolation in animation, you'll know that we have animation timing functions, cubic beziers, and things like this that allow us to sort of ease values in. All of the techniques that I've been talking about today relate to length values in CSS, pixels, REMs, all of that kind of thing. But there are also other values, and what I'm worried about with the variable fonts is that a lot of those values aren't pixel values or length values. They're unitless values, and these techniques won't work with that. So I think it's really important that we start talking about getting something like this. And that's why I've proposed an issue on the W3C's GitHub page, and I'd like to encourage you all to go and have a look at that, or even just talk to me about it if you have any ideas, and contribute to that discussion, because I feel like at the moment, if we don't sort of get this right, we'll get these new tools, but we'll still be constrained by past limitations, past perceptions, and those kind of things. So I want to encourage you all to do that. And in general, on the theme of what I've been talking about today, I want to encourage you all to get out there, go forth and explore strange new worlds. Today we've looked at and explored the sort of limitations of fluid typography, but this is just one small area of the web, right? And if you're free of your past sort of perceptions and your perceived limitations, then you can go and find sort of new territory anywhere on the web. I don't think there's been a better time for doing this than now. And most importantly, with new typography and layout features coming soon, I think there's an obligation to go and do this and to adjust your ways of thinking so that you're ready to take advantage of the opportunities that are coming today. And that's what I want to leave you with. Thank you very much.